Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Services Ops Podcast presented by Provis, the best podcast dedicated to the people, processes, and technology of running a successful services business. My name is Chris Souza, and I'm here with co-host, co-founder, and CEO of Provis, Mahesh Bakshi. Hey, Mahesh, how are we doing today?
Doing good, Chris. Yet another episode. This time I'm very, very excited for Sudhakar to be our guest for multiple reasons. Don't want to steal thunder from you or him, but Sudhakar and I work together, but he is one of the best quote to cash CPQ leader that I've had opportunity to work with.
Absolutely, yeah. And with that, let's introduce our guest. Sudhakar Jukanti, Senior Director of GTM Systems at Confluent. Sudhakar, as mentioned before, has had the pleasure of working with Mahesh in the past with great leadership roles in solution delivery, something very familiar to a lot of our audience at Aptus CPQ, a customer advisory board member for Salesforce, so you know he knows his stuff, and limited partner at GTM Fund, and overall just a bold leader and a really good example of the type of people we want to talk to with this podcast. So Sudhakar, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mahesh, for having the opportunity. I always enjoyed chatting with Mahesh on various topics. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, great. All right, so let's get straight into it. Let's talk about you for a minute. Let's kind of let our audience know your background, where are you coming from, and what are you doing today?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I have roughly 20 years of experience in the enterprise application space. Believe it or not, I started my first job with building pricing engine for Oracle back in the day. So that's where my love for CPQ started. Eventually, I joined Deloitte. I implemented Oracle CPQ for many of the Fortune 100 customers. I was in professional services back then. Then later on, I joined Aptus, worked along with Mahesh, and together we have implemented CPQ for some of the most complex customers, probably the space I have seen. And yeah, in this process, I've enjoyed CPQ, all the time. And last 2 years, I'm at Confluent. I'm leading GTM Systems, which is primarily work with leaders from sales ops, marketing ops, and CSG ops, and deliver systems for the requirements.
Yeah, that's great. And part of the reason we're so excited to have you on is because there's this subject of how do services leaders work with systems leaders, right? People, technology, and process. We can't miss technology. And there are certain bits of technology that services leaders control, that they inform, and they might not even be aware of our certain challenges, right? And so what we want to do is have this conversation with you and help our audience understand what it means to interact with the people who control their systems, and maybe break a few of the perceptions that might be incorrect, as well as thinking like, what are the strategic advantages of working with systems leaders like yourself? So really excited to have you on, especially like Mahesh said, your extreme lead to cash expertise, as well as you being in professional services, as well as you running systems. You're right in the middle of it, and you know a lot. So I think let's start for both Mahesh and Sudhakar. I think that there are different perceptions that services leaders might have when it comes to business systems leaders. They might call them IT, or they might just say the tech guys, or they might just say like the roadblock. Let's talk about those perceptions and either add validity or kind of break them down a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I was in services for 15 years of my career, and one of the things I've always noticed while I'm at customer sites as part of implementations is that the people there always think that IT is slowing down their business. If I talk to a business leader, they are always like, "Hey, I want to roll this out fast," but our systems team thinks that it takes more amount of time. So in my role, I'm very actively trying to address that. And some of the ways that we can handle is one, involving the system leaders very early into the discussion, having them seated at the table, because systems team has a unique perspective of the company. As they work with multiple departments, they kind of have an idea of what's going on each department, and they are naturally likely to have cross-functional impact understanding of any problem the services leaders are trying to solve. So I would say having a seat at the table is number one. And I've seen some leaders do that. In one of the CSG leaders I have huge respect for, he used to invite me to his staff meeting. So that is to give me into the portfolio of things that they are thinking of. Not some of them not necessarily system related, but being in the systems space that gives a unique opportunity to give I provide my thought or leadership on how I can solve their problems.
Yeah, and what do you think about that, Mahesh? I think there's he just brought something really, really important, which is the perspective and the viewpoint of other people's strategic priorities, other departments' strategic priorities. We've talked about this a lot. Like, how do you align? Who'd have thought that there's this whole department that already exists that knows what everybody else is doing?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a gem, and that is so true when you are talking about enterprise applications, enterprise systems, right? And both Sudhakar and I have worked in solving a very critical problem for the large enterprises. And so what happens is, the business have a pain point, right? And they want to solve it as quickly as possible. Now, sometimes the answer to that pain point is what I would like to call a tool, not a system, not a platform, not a solution. It's just a tool, right? And so if it's limited to some sort of tool, I think by all means, you should move as quickly as possible. And I think that's an isolated kind of a problem, and you can implement a tool and get it done with, right? When we talk about more business critical problems, lead to cash, quote to cash, these are more of those transformative problems that companies have. If you are thinking of solving everything that comes from lead management to opportunity management to the CPQ part of it, or PSA or ERP or billing, invoicing, any of these systems, they a particular team may have a problem. Let's say salespeople have a problem as I'm not able to sell faster, I'm not able to get the accurate pricing. That's a pain point for sure, but that's not limited to one team, one group, right? This is where kind of collaborating with the GTM team, like what Sudhakar does, or systems team, or IT teams, right? This is absolutely critical, because you are solving a problem that is going to cut across multiple different groups. But it's not about just the people and process or technology there. It's all three of them come together, because now you are going to work on something where the data becomes the king, and that data has to flow through end to end for the organizations and each of the groups that are benefiting from it to realize what it means, right? We all talk about AI all day in, day out, right? 5 minutes into the conversation, you cannot say that word, right? But what is it? AI is a magic? No, absolutely not. AI needs a structured data to work on it. And the structured data would not come if Sudhakars of the world and the GTM teams and IT teams and systems teams are not thinking through how the data flows from end to end, and how you can actually make use of the data for AI technologies to do something meaningful out of it. Otherwise, you are talking about, back in the days, I used to work with IBM as one of our customers. And, there are large teams dedicated for something called data lake. The data lake, nothing wrong with it. That's an after effect of everyone trying to do whatever they did. And now somebody, you can't replace those systems immediately. So now somebody has to come up with the data lake concept, because, hey, that was missing from the get-go, which is what I think, the GTM teams bring to the table for solving a business critical transformative problems across the board.
Yeah, how's that sound, Sudhakar? Did he nail it?
Yeah, he nailed it. Yeah, I totally agree with Mahesh on that.
So can you talk a little bit about this data structure and help our audience once again understand, if you're just in services org, or if you're just in sales org, you might not fully understand the breadth of data across an organization that you and your teams would be responsible for. What is the language our audience should be thinking of when communicating with you about data? How much should they understand that is going on that they don't even understand? Like, help educate our audience there.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So one of the key is that having the definition of metrics clearly defined very early on, right? If the PS business, utilization is one of the key metric that every leader tracks, right? Similarly, PS margins is another key metric, and PS attached, like how many deals are attached, how many PS deals are attached along with the subscription deals. Having these metrics clearly defined upfront really helps the system architects to build the infrastructure to support the data flow to get to those kind of metrics. And many times the metrics are afterthoughts. If that's the case, then you might have built systems in certain way, and it will be very difficult to pull the right data that the leaders are looking for. So to your point, I would start from defining the metrics, then building the infrastructure in place to get to those metrics eventually.
So how do you, and I'm sure you both have done this many times in your implementations, how do you work with these teams to define these metrics? Because I'm sure it starts with data attach rates. But then also predict a margin. Also this, all this, right? And then they have all of a sudden you have a list of 50 defined metrics, which in theory, right? In theory, you can track them all, but are they really valuable? Like, how do you work with teams to help them marry the strategic need with the technical reality?
Yeah, sure. So I can start and Mahesh can add. So this is what I tell my team all the time, right? So whatever the project we are delivering, if it is not moving the needle for business, let's not do it, right? So I want my team, I manage team of business analysts. I tell my team to always think from the perspective of what outcome we are delivering, right? In some of the team meetings and retros, I kind of bring those metrics upfront. It is an education for my team to understand what actually moves the needle for the business teams. Then work backwards. Once you have the good understanding of metrics, then going into these projects, new projects, you can always tie to those metrics saying, hey, whatever we are doing here, does it move the needle in the PS context? Whatever the project we are doing, does it increase PS utilization, right? To get into more details as it's a PS podcast. So one of the project we have done was PS hourly billing. 2 3 years back, we were having daily rates for our business, and daily rates was limiting us not to bill hourly. Right? At times, we are limited by billing multiples of 8. If we have an opportunity to bill like 10 hours, we could not earlier. Right? So now, when we take on this project, it's very evident from that project that one, it will increase the revenue. Right? It's as clear as it can be. As you can bill more hours, it will increase the revenue. And now you're not leaving any utilization on the table. So if an PS resource worked on 10 hours, now you can consume 10 hours. With the daily rates, you could have not billed for 10 hours. So with that project, we are able to tie to the metrics, and we are able to show. And I track those metrics every quarter to see how those metrics change over the period of time with the projects that you're working on.
And to add to that, I think one of the techniques that has always worked for me, and I've been using it for many years now, is once you're a good defined metric and everybody aligns to it, I think, Sudhakar, everything you said absolutely makes sense. The question typically becomes like, how do you, out of the 50 things that people are saying is important to them, how do you get to the 3 or 5 or 7 or whatever you want? And what has worked really well for me is any metric or any of those discussions, I call it ask so what for 3 times, right? So anything that they say, just say so what, and then the answer that you get again, say so what. And usually it is so effective. By the time, if they're able to answer the third so what, I think you're getting to a very, very quantifiable, measurable outcome that it's going to impact in your business transformation or business process, right? And so like Chris said, I mean, there could be 50 different priorities or 50 different metrics. I mean, someone will say utilization is important, someone will say billing rate is important, someone will say work breakdown structure is important, someone will say, well, which services we are selling is important, what questions we ask is important. Well, all of those things are important, but how do you get to really narrow it down to definable, measurable kind of metrics? And that's so what has worked so well for me, that I use it all the time. So yeah, I think matrix is important. It drives and helps discussions, or get discussions focused around what ultimately you want to achieve, right? Because in a transformative projects, as Sudhakar and I have gone through a room full of people, which represents marketing and sales and pre-sales and services and delivery and finance and so on and so forth. And there are no wrong answers. Everyone has something that's important to them and what they're tracking towards. And when you get through that kind of a room full of people, driving to 3 or 5 or 7 metrics is really critical. And anytime you are going to get stuck in decision making process, you have to have a look at that 3 or 5 metrics and say, whatever we are discussing and whatever decision we are making, is it going to impact any of those metrics and move it in the right direction? So I think that's extremely critical to have those nailed down upfront for this cross functional projects to be super successful.
Yeah, I agree with Mahesh 100%. The technique of so what, that's new to me. I'm definitely going to use next time around in my projects.
Yeah, it's very effective. So that try it.
All right, so everybody dealing with Sudhakar and Mahesh the next few weeks, get ready to answer 3 questions 3 times. So let's talk a little bit about the approach to technology. Yeah, I think you've probably come across this every single day. A business leader from some department comes to you with an idea, and they're like, "Hey, I found this thing, this technology. It's really cool. We want it. We have to go through you. Please get started with it." How should services leaders be working with IT when it comes to identifying technology solutions, like Mahesh said, something that's more impactful than just a tool? How do you evaluate technology with them? What's the advice you would give?
Yeah, sure. So at Confluent, we have something called Architecture Review Board. So every new technology that is brought into, the company is run through the board. Primarily, the Architecture Review Board looks for the functionality overlap, like whatever we are, planning to buy. Do we have other tool does that similar purpose? That is one check. And our InfoSec team looks from InfoSec angle is a tool that's something that comply with the standards that we have. And then our procurement team also looks at it from licensing perspective. So I would say institutionalizing the ARB process really helpful. So one, you are ensuring that you're not bringing any tool into the company that's not vetted by InfoSec and other departments. And two, you're ensuring that all the stakeholders in the loop. Our ARB consists of cross-functional stakeholders, and it's really a good way of providing visibility to all the stakeholders on what's coming into the company.
But Sudhakar, and I'm sure you do that. It's probably hidden behind the 3 kind of boards that you talked about. But I think, what I've seen, especially with the enterprise customers, is but InfoSec is important. The architecture review board is important. The data flow is important. I think one of the things which I believe the GTM teams and the IT teams play a pivotal role in systems like this is making sure that there's a focus on the user journey and a consistent and intuitive user experience, right? Because there is no one solution to solve. If I take a lead to cash as a process, I mean, there are so many processes in an enterprise world, right? But if I take lead to cash as an example, there is no one solution that's going to solve everything. And as a result, you have to think of so many things, including data, including architecture, including InfoSec, including data flow, all of that kind of stuff. But more importantly, what is the user experience going to be like? Because the adoption is the key. I mean, no matter how beautiful you design the systems, but if the user is not going to or is not ready to adopt, or it's not intuitive for the user, then it doesn't matter, right? And so maybe if you can throw some light in terms of what you guys have done or how you have brought that user persona journey based thinking into all of these architecture boards or different boards that you talked about, I think that would be really helpful for the audience as well.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So as part of the evaluation, primarily for sales tool, we would like any sales tool to be well integrated with Salesforce and in a way that the end user don't need to leave Salesforce. That's one of our guiding principle, to bring any new tool to the sales tech stack. As an AE, we want to minimize the context switching, between the apps. So that's definitely one thing we do.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's important because what you don't want is in the process of trying to improve the productivity of your sales team, you don't want to slow them down through different, user experience and trying to wonder like, okay, what do I do next? Where do I go next? All that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's cool.
Here's one question is, when do you want to be brought into these situations, right? So let's go back to an early perception. We talked about the early part of the conversation. IT slows things down, right? That's a perception somebody may have. When should business leaders be coming to you with these questions? They have a twinkle in their eye about some technology they heard about. Do they talk to you right away? Or do they get down a little bit of a path and prove out a business case? And then like, where's the optimal time to start bringing you to the table?
Yeah, so there is no right or wrong answer here, depending upon the context and situation of the companies. But I would say, as soon as they can, right? It doesn't hurt to vet the idea, even if it's very preliminary, saying, hey, this is a business pain point we have, and this is what we heard from some of the people we know, and what are your thoughts? At times we may have a perspective, we might have seen those tool other places, or just in my case, I have the network of people who can help validate some of these ideas. I can ask for input saying, hey, there's a tool that solves this problem. Have you guys thought about it or used it? If you get the feedback, that will help. So it doesn't hurt to involve like as early as they can, at least to vet the idea, not necessarily getting into the details that can happen later.
Yeah. I think about Mahesh, Provis customers a lot of times have gone down a product CPQ journey and gone through the business flow and said, this sounds great. Then when it comes time for technical implementation, whoops, right? Because product CPQ is not the same as services CPQ. You're just not going to get there. And so I think about, if you ever worry that IT or business systems will slow you down, what's going to slow you down even more is spending a year trying to figure things out before they tell you in 5 minutes they could have told you no. It wasn't going to actually work. So balance that as you're deciding when to bring in your systems experts.
Sure, definitely. And in my previous role at Aptus, I was part of the PS leadership team. I was pretty much reviewing all the CPQ estimates. There's a complex Excel that Mahesh can remember from our times that we used to review, for every deal. The concept, to going back to your point of product and services CPQ, many people don't even know that they need a tool to automate the estimation process. So the tool did not exist. And for some of our Aptus customers, we try to fit in services CPQ flow into the traditional CPQ. But naturally, in services CPQ, you're dealing with resources, the rate cards, the discounts, and the margins, which is slightly more broadly different from how do you configure a product. So to your point, I mean, the fact that if someone realizes that they need a tool, that itself is a big win, versus assuming that hey, we have been doing Excel for 20 plus years, let's continue to do that.
Yeah. And I think we have seen that trend change, right? I mean, Sudhakar and I have so many wartime stories during our days at Aptus, and that was early days of quote to cash transformations, and now it's a mainstream, one of the fastest growing domain and all that stuff. And for what it's worth, I think a good thing that has happened is like Sudhakar has gone and joined Confluent to be part of the GTM team. I know someone who has been part of Nokia team. I know someone who joined VMware. I know someone who joined Google, and so many other places where they are now running the GTM teams, right? And the advantage of all of that is like, hey, it's not a question of when do you involve. It's a question of, hey, is there a credibility in the organization to say that, hey, whether it's a product CPQ problem or a services CPQ problem, we have the right people to go to who come from that domain experience, which wasn't the case, unfortunately, 10, 15 years ago when we were, doing mass scale CPQ transformation projects. IT was IT and business was business, and there was no core domain knowledge that existed as part of the GTM teams, right? And so that made our life definitely difficult, and CPQ was evolving and it wasn't as mature as it is today and all that kind of stuff. But now, thanks to all of this, transformations, it becoming mainstream, and Sudhakars of the world who are actually now sitting at a place where they can influence the right decisions, they can influence the right outcomes, and they can influence the adoption of the newer technologies in that transformation process.
That's great. All right, one last subject before we wrap up this really great conversation. Sudhakar, what we like to do is leave everybody with some takeaways, right? Something that you want our audience to remember as they finish up this episode and go back into their real office, virtual office, wherever office. So let's go ahead and start with Mahesh. What do you think our audience needs to take away from this strategic relationship with systems?
So I think number one, I think the times have changed. I think there was a time 15 years ago when CIO's job was to keep the lights on, maybe 2 decades ago. And all of that has changed. Now CIO is responsible for all of the key KPIs across the organization. It's no longer, nobody hires CIO to keep the lights on anymore, right? So gone are those days. And along with that charter changing has, the IT applications, GTM teams, whatever we want to call it. But I think all of that has changed underneath it, right? The IT is no longer responsible to keep lights on. IT is no longer responsible to maintain the systems only. IT is no longer responsible to say, deal with the vendor, products and all that kind of stuff. So I think number one, my key takeaway is like, I think the IT or GTM teams are your friends. They are actually going to achieve more than what you are thinking that you want to solve for, right? That's number one. Number two, your enterprise problem or even your particular pain point is certainly going to play a much bigger role in the overall transformative process. So if you may think that only you have a problem, but that's not true. Your problem is going to be a bigger problem across the enterprise, and it's going to be transformative. And the third most important one, which is why you should engage with the GTM teams and IT teams, is the data that you are going to either consume to solve your pain point or create as part of solving your pain point is actually going to play a much bigger role in transforming the business for your organization, which is where you may not be able to think through how all of this data connects and how to make use of this data through the latest technologies such as AI. This is where your GTM teams, this is where our IT teams, applications teams actually come in, and why you should actually engage with them as soon as you are starting to think about solving a particular pain point.
Very nice. And Sudhakar, what do you want our audience to walk away with?
I would say 3 things. One, for services leaders, always have system leaders, at the table. Bring them as early as you can. That is one. Second is, as I mentioned, clear understanding and alignment of the business KPIs. Ultimately, all the projects that we deliver, we want to have a tangible impact on the business. That's number 2. And number 3 is build a framework where the teams work together in an agile way and have frequent retrospective to look at hey, what are we doing? Is there any better way of doing it? Have the continuous improvement mindset. These 3 things I would say the key takeaways.
That's great. We should be charging for this. This is it's amazing. This is free. Well, hey, gentlemen, this has been another wonderful conversation. Sudhakar, we're so grateful to you for joining us. The audience is going to appreciate it, and this has been really valuable. So thank you for taking your time. And with that, we'd like to thank you, our audience. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe to the Services Ops Podcast. Find us on LinkedIn and other social platforms, and go out and have fun being a courageous services leader.